Hello again. Welcome back, and we are going to be reading today again in our book. So, we are reading 52 to 70. All right. So, today there's actually no questions. Today, what I want you to do is I want you to listen to the story. You can take notes as you're listening. Hang on, something moved. Okay. You can take notes as you're listening. And what I want you to do is to just do a summary about the story. Okay. So, again, we are on 52. And we're going to read until 70. All right. All right. So, here's the picture for today. Are you ready? I'm excited. Okay. Laura and Mary were up next morning earlier than the sun. They ate their breakfast in cornmeal mush with prairie hen gravy and hurried to help Ma wash the dishes. Pa was loading everything else into the wagon and hitched up Pet and Patty. When the sun rose, they were driving across the prairie. Have you ever been to a prairie? It's very cool. All right, driving across the prairie. There was no road now. Pet and Patty waded through the grasses, and the wagon left behind only the tracks of its wheels. Before noon, Pa said, "Whoa!" The wagon stopped. "Here we are, Caroline," he said. "Right here we'll build our house." Laura and Mary scrambled over the feed box and dropped to the ground in a hurry. All around them there was nothing but grassy prairie spreading to the edge of the sky. Quite near them, to the north, the creek bottom lay below the prairie. Some darker green treetops showed, and beyond them bits of the rim of the earthen bluffs held up the prairie's grasses. Far away to the east, a broken line of different grasses lay on the prairie, and Pa said that was the river. "That's the Verdigris River," he said, pointing it out to Ma. Right away he and Ma began to unload the wagon. They took out everything and piled it on the ground. Then they took off the wagon cover and pulled it over the pile. Then they took even the wagon box off, while Mary and Laura and Jack watched. The wagon had been home for a long time. Now there was nothing left of it but the four wheels and the parts that connected them. Pet and Patty were still hitched to the tongue. Pa took the bucket with his axe, and sitting on the skeleton wagon, he drove away. He drove right down into the prairie out of sight. "Where's Pa going?" Laura asked, sorry. And Ma said he's going to get a load of logs from the creek bottoms. It was strange and frightening to be left without the wagon on the high prairie. The land and sky seemed too large, and Laura felt small. She wanted to hide and be still in the tall grass, like the little prairie chickens, but she didn't. She helped Ma, while Mary sat on the grass and minded baby Carrie. Minded means to look after. First, Laura and Ma made the beds under the wagon cover tent. Then Ma arranged the boxes and bundles while Laura pulled all the grass from the space in front of the tent. That made a bare place for the fire. They couldn't start the fire until Pa brought wood. There was nothing to do, so Laura explored a little. She did not go far from the tent, but she found an odd little kind of tunnel in the grass. You'd never notice it from looking across the waving grass tops. But when you came to it, there it was, a narrow, straight, hard path down between the grass stems. It went on into the endless prairie. Laura went along it a while. She went slowly and more slowly, and then stood still and felt quite odd. So she turned around and came back quickly. When she looked over her shoulder, wasn't anything there, but she still hurried. When Pa came up riding, came back, I'm sorry, when Pa came riding back on the load of logs, Laura told him about the path. He said he had seen it yesterday. It's an old trail, he said. That night by the fire, Laura asked him again about when she would see a papoose. But Pa didn't know. He said he had never seen Indians unless they wanted to be seen. He had seen Indians when he was a boy in New York State, but Laura never had. She knew they were wild men with red skin, and their hatchets were called tomahawks. Pa knew all about wild animals, so he must know about wild men too. Laura thought he would show her a papoose someday, just as he had shown her a fawn and little bears and wolves. For days Pa hauled logs. He made 2 piles of them, one for the house and one for the stable. They began to be a road where he drove back and forth to the creek bottoms. And at night, on their picket lines, Pet and Patty ate the grass till it was short and stubby all around the log piles. Pa began the house first. He paced off the sides of it on the ground. Then with his spade he dug a shallow little hollow along 2 sides of that space. Into these hollows he rolled 2 of the biggest logs. They were sound, strong logs because they must hold up the house. They were called sills. Then Pa chose 2 more strong, big logs, and he rolled these logs into the ends of the sills so that they made a hollow square. Now, with his axe, he cut wide, deep notches near each end of these logs. He cut these notches on the top of the log, but with his eyes he measured the sill. He cut the notches so that they would fit about half of the sill. When the notches were cut, he rolled the log over, and the notches fit down into the sill. That finished the foundation of the house. It was 1 log high. The sills were half buried in the ground, and the logs on the ends fitted snugly to the ground. At the corners where they crossed, the notches let them fit together so that they were no thicker than 1 log, and the 2 ends stuck out beyond the notches. I'm reading it really slow because it's kind of hard to understand. So here are the sills. There's the other logs. See, there's the notches. So they're going to fit together so that these are buried and these are at the ground level, because you need a solid foundation, just like Jesus tells us we need a solid foundation, which is Him. When you build a house, you need a solid foundation. And if you don't, it'll fall down in a storm. Just like if your faith is not strong in the Lord, when the storms come, you'll be like scared and stuff and worried instead of relying on God. Okay? All right. Next day, Pa began the walls. From each side he rolled a log and he notched its end so that it fitted down into the end logs. Then he rolled up logs from the ends and notched them so that they fitted down into the side logs. Now the whole house was 2 logs high. The logs fitted solidly together on the corners, but no log is ever perfectly straight, and all logs are bigger on one end than they are on the other. So cracks were left between them all along the walls. But that did not matter. Pa would check those cracks. All by himself he built the house 3 logs high. Then Ma helped him. Pa lifted one end of the log onto the wall. Then Ma lifted it while he lifted the other end. held it, while he lifted the other end. He stood up on the wall to cut the notches, and Ma helped roll and hold the log while he settled it where it should be to make the corners perfectly square. So log by log they built the walls higher till they were pretty high, and Laura couldn't get over them any more. Was tired of watching Ma and Pa build the house, and she went into the tall grass exploring. Suddenly she heard Pa shout, "Let it go! Get out from under!" The heavy log slid. Pa was trying to hold it up on his end to keep it from falling on Ma. He couldn't. It crashed down. Laura saw Ma huddled on the ground. So here is the picture for that. Yeah, the log cabin that they're building. See how they all go in notches. Okay, and there's Ma. She got to Ma almost as quickly as Pa did. Pa knelt down and called Ma in a dreadful voice, and Ma gasped, "I'm all right." The log was on her foot. Pa lifted the log, and Ma pulled her foot from under it. Pa felt to see if any bones were broken. "Move your arms," he said. Is your back hurt? Can you turn your head?" Ma moved her arms and turned her head. "Thank you, Lord," Pa said. He helped Ma to sit up. She said again, "I'm all right, Charles. It's just my foot." Quickly Pa took off her shoe and stocking and felt her foot all over, moving the ankle and the instep and every toe. "Does it hurt much?" he asked. Ma's face was gray and her mouth was a tight line. "Not much," she said. "No bones broken," said Pa. "It's only a bad sprain." Ma said cheerfully, "Well, a sprain's soon mended. Don't be upset, Charles." "I blame myself," said Pa. "I should have used skids." He helped Ma to the tent. He built up the fire and heated water. Then, when the water was as hot as Ma could bear, he put her swollen foot into it. It was providential that the foot was not crushed. Only the little hollow in the ground had saved her. Remember we talked about providential meaning God intervened? Okay. Pa kept pouring more hot water into the tub in which Ma's foot was soaking. Her foot was red from the heat, and a puffy ankle began to turn purple. Ma took her foot out of the water and bound strips of rags tightly around her ankle. "I can manage," she said. She could not get her shoe on, so she tied more rags around her foot, and she hobbled on it. She got supper as usual, only a little more slowly. But Pa said she could not help to build the house until her ankle was well. He hewed out skids. These were long, flat slabs. One end rested on the ground, and the other end rested on the log wall. It was not going to lift any more logs. He and Ma would roll them up these skids. But Ma's ankle was not well yet. When she unwrapped it in the evening to soak it in the hot water, it was all purple and black and green and yellow. The house must wait. Then one afternoon, Pa came merrily whistling up the creek road. They had not expected him home from hunting so soon. As soon as he saw them, he shouted, "Good news!" They had a neighbor only about 2 miles away, on the other side of the creek. Pa had met him in the woods. They were going to trade work, and that would make it easier for everybody. "He's a bachelor," said Pa, "and he says he can get along without a house better than you and the girls can. So he's going to help me first. Then, as soon as he gets his logs ready, I'll go over and help him. They need not wait any longer for a house, and Ma need not do any more work on it." "How do you like that, Caroline?" Pa asked. Joyfully, and Ma said, "That's good, Charles. I'm glad." Early next morning Mr. Edwards came. He was lean and tall and brown. He bowed to Ma and called her ma'am politely, but he told Laura that he was a wildcat from Tennessee. He wore tall boots and a ragged jumper and a coon skin cap, and he could spit tobacco juice farther than Laura had ever imagined that anyone could spit tobacco juice. He could hit anything he spit at, too. Laura tried and tried, but she could never spit as far or so well as Mr. Edwards could. He was a fast worker, and one day he had built those walls as high as Pa wanted them. They joked and sang while they worked, and their axes made the chips fly. On top of the walls they set up a skeleton roof of slender poles. Then in the south wall they cut a tall hole in the door for a door. And in the west wall and the east wall they cut square holes for windows. Laura couldn't wait to see the inside of the house. As soon as the tall pole was cut, she ran inside. Everything was striped here. Stripes of sunshine came through the cracks in the west wall, and stripes of shadows came down from the poles overhead. The stripes of shade and sunshine were all across Laura's hands and arms and her bare feet, and through the cracks between the logs she could see stripes of prairie. The sweet smell of the prairie mixed with the sweet smell of cut wood. Then, as Pa cut away the logs to make the window hole in the west wall, chunks of sunshine came in. When he finished, a big block of sunshine lay on the floor inside the house. Around the door hole and the window holes, Pa and Mr. Edwards nailed thin slabs against the cut edges of the wood, and the house was finished, all but the roof. The walls were solid and the house was large, much larger than the tent. It was a nice house. Mr. Edwards said he would go home now, but Pa and Ma said he must stay for supper. Ma had cooked an especially good supper because they had company. There was stewed jackrabbit with white flour dumplings and plenty of gravy. There was a steaming hot, thick cornbread flavored with bacon fat. There was a molasses to eat on the cornbread, but because it was company supper, they did not sweeten their coffee with molasses. Ma brought out a little paper sack of pale brown store sugar. Mr. Edwards said he surely did appreciate that supper. Then Pa brought out his fiddle. Mr. Edwards stretched out on the ground to listen. But first Pa played for Laura and Mary. He played their favorite song, and he sang it. Laura liked it best of all because Pa's voice went down deep, deep, deeper in that song. Oh, I am a gypsy king, I come and go as I please. I pull my old nightcap down and take the world at my ease. Then his voice went deep, deep down, deeper than the very oldest bullfrogs. Oh, I am a gypsy king. They all laughed. Laura could hardly stop laughing. Oh, sing it again, Pa, sing it again, she cried, before she remembered that children must be seen and not heard. Then she was quiet. Pa went on playing, and everything began to dance. Mr. Edwards rose up on one elbow, then he sat up, then he jumped up, and he danced. He danced like a jumping jack in the moonlight, while Pa's fiddle kept on rollicking. Oh my word, that was silly of me. Rollicking, and his foot kept tapping on the ground. And Laura's hands and Mary's hands were clapping together, and their feet were patting too. And there's the picture. Rollicking. I don't know what I was thinking. All right. You're the fiddlingest fool I ever saw, Mr. Edwards shouted admiringly to Pa. He didn't stop dancing, Pa didn't stop playing, and he played Monkey Musk and Arkansas traveler, and Irish washerwoman. Baby Carrie couldn't sleep in all that music. She sat up in Ma's lap, looking at Mr. Edwards with round eyes, and clapping her little hands and laughing. Even the firelight danced, and all around its edge the shadows were dancing. All the new house stood still and the quiet in the dark. Stood still and quiet in the dark, till the big moon rose and shone in its gray walls and the yellow chips around it. Mr. Edwards said he must go. It was a long way back to his camp on the other side of the woods and the creek. He took his gun and said good night to Laura and Mary and Ma. He said a bachelor got mighty lonely, and he surely had enjoyed this evening of home life. "Play, Ingalls," he said. "Play me down the road." So while he went down the creek road and out of sight, Pa played, and Pa and Mr. Edwards and Laura sang with all their might. Old Dan Tucker was a fine old man. He washed his face in a frying pan, combed his hair with a wagon wheel, and died with a toothpick in his heel. Get out of the way for old Dan Tucker, he's too late to get his supper. Supper's over and the dishes washed, nothing left but the piece of squash. Old Dan Tucker went to town, riding a mule, leading a hound. That's where it ends. That's the song. Far over the prairie rang Pa's big voice and Laura's little voice, and faintly from the creek bottom came the last whoop from Mr. Edwards. Get out of the way for old Dan Tucker, he's too late to get his supper. Supper's over and the dishes washed, nothing left but a piece of squash. When Pa's fiddle stopped, they could not hear Mr. Edwards any more, only the wind rustling in the prairie grasses. The big yellow moon was sailing high overhead. The sky was so full of light that not one star twinkled in it, and all the prairie was a shadowy meadowland. Then from the woods by the creek a nightingale began to sing. Everything was silent. Listening to the nightingale's song, on and on, the cool wind moved over the prairie, and the song was round and clear above the grasses whispering. The sky was like a bowl of light overturned on the flat black land. The song ended. No one moved or spoke. Laura and Mary were quiet. Pa and Ma sat motionless. Only the wind stirred and the grasses sighed. Then Pa lifted the fiddle on his shoulders and softly touched the bow to the string. A few notes fell like clear drops of water into the silence. A pause, and Pa began to play the nightingale's song. The nightingale answered him. The nightingale began to sing again. It was a song with Pa's fiddle. When the strings were silent, the nightingale went on singing. When it paused, the fiddle called to it, and it sang again. The birds and the fiddle were talking to each other in the cool night under the moon. And that's where we're going to end today, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.